Structure Before Scale by Wealthy Mindset Audiobooks. Most people who feel financially stuck are not earning too little. They are building without a foundation. The exhaustion that follows a raise, the anxiety that survives a promotion, the quiet sense that more money has not produced more peace. These are not signs of failure, but of a misdiagnosis so common it has come to feel like simply the way things are. The problem was never the income. It was always the architecture that should have been waiting to receive it. This audiobook is not about earning more. It is about finally understanding why more has not been enough, and what, quietly and permanently, changes when that understanding arrives. There is a kind of tiredness that a good night's sleep does not fix. It is not the tiredness of someone who has been lazy or careless or indifferent to their future. It is the tiredness of someone who has done everything they were supposed to do, who showed up, performed, advanced, negotiated, and earned, and who still arrives at the end of the month with a feeling they cannot quite name. Not crisis, not collapse. Something quieter and, in many ways, harder to address than either of those things. A persistent, low-frequency sense that despite everything moving in the right direction, something essential remains unresolved. If you have felt this, you already know it does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive as an overdraft notice or a missed payment. It arrives in the small, private moments. In the brief pause after checking your balance, where the number is fine, technically fine, and yet nothing in you relaxes. In the way a raise produces a week of relief before the familiar tension reassembles itself around a slightly larger life. In the quiet suspicion, never quite spoken aloud, that you are working harder than ever and somehow not getting further ahead. That suspicion deserves more respect than most people give it. Because here is what is true about the people who feel this way. They are not failing. They are not undisciplined. They are not making the dramatic financial mistakes that fill cautionary articles and viral videos. They are doing the respectable thing, building careers, growing income, managing expenses well enough, and they are still arriving at the same emotional destination month after month. That is not a character problem. That is a diagnostic problem. It means the solution being applied does not match the problem that actually exists. Most of us were handed one primary tool for financial progress: earn more. The advice was everywhere, delivered with the confidence of settled truth. Negotiate your salary, develop your skills, build income streams. And to be clear, none of that is wrong. Earning more is not a bad idea, but it was presented as the answer when it is, at best, only part of the equation. And when you apply a partial answer to a complete problem, you get partial relief, which is exactly what most people experience: a brief loosening of tension, followed by its quiet return, followed by the conclusion that they simply have not earned enough yet, so they earn more, and the cycle continues. What makes this particularly difficult to see clearly is that the effort is real. The progress, by most external measures, is real. The income has grown, the lifestyle has improved, and yet the feeling of financial stability, the settled, unhurried confidence that suggests a person genuinely knows where they stand, remains elusive. This is the contradiction that lives at the center of this audiobook. Not the contradiction of someone who failed, but of someone who followed the instructions correctly and arrived somewhere they did not expect. Morgan Housel once observed that wealth is what you don't see. It is the absence of spending, the quiet accumulation that leaves no visible trace. Most people, without realizing it, are optimizing for the visible version of financial progress, while the invisible kind, the kind that actually compounds into freedom, never gets built. And perhaps that is the beginning of the real question. Not how do I earn more, but where does what I earn actually go? And why does more of it not seem to produce more of what I actually want? These are different questions. They lead to different places. And the willingness to ask the second one, even tentatively, even with some resistance, is what separates people who eventually achieve genuine financial stability from those who remain permanently one raise away from it. You may have arrived here with a practical question. Something about income or spending or how to finally make the numbers work. But somewhere beneath that practical question is a more unsettling one, the kind you think about in quiet moments and then set aside because the day requires your attention. The kind that asks whether the strategy you have been faithfully applying is actually designed to get you where you want to go. That question is worth sitting with, not because the answer is alarming, but because clarity, real clarity, the kind that does not require motivation to sustain, only becomes possible once the right question is on the table. And the right question is not how do I earn more? The right question is why hasn't earning more been enough? That is where this begins. Every misdiagnosis begins with a reasonable assumption. That is what makes it so difficult to question. If the original belief were obviously wrong, it would not survive long enough to cause damage. It is precisely because the belief is partially true, logical on the surface, consistent with what most people around you are doing, that it goes unexamined for years. And in finance, an unexamined belief does not simply sit still. It compounds. It shapes decisions quietly and consistently, in the background, until one day the gap between where you are and where you expected to be becomes impossible to ignore. The belief most people carry into their financial lives goes something like this. The problem is always income. Not enough of it, not growing fast enough, not arriving from enough sources. And the solution, therefore, is always the same. Earn more, and the rest will follow. This is the central assumption that financial culture reinforces at almost every turn. The promoted employee is celebrated. The side hustle is applauded. The salary negotiation is treated as the primary act of financial intelligence. And because these things are genuinely useful, the belief that they are sufficient rarely gets challenged. But useful is not the same as a complete, and incomplete solutions, applied with great consistency, produce a very specific kind of frustration. The frustration of someone who is clearly doing something right and somehow still not arriving at the right destination. Here is the pattern that plays out so reliably it could almost be described as a financial law. Income increases, and because there is more arriving, the lifestyle quietly expands to meet it. The apartment gets slightly better. The groceries become less deliberate. The dinners out shift from occasional to routine. None of it feels excessive. None of it is dramatic. It is simply the natural, almost gravitational behavior of spending in the absence of prior design. And at the end of this entirely reasonable sequence, the margin, the space between what comes in and what remains, stays almost exactly where it was before the raise. The number on the income line is larger. The feeling of financial progress is not, and so the prescription is written again: more income. James Clear put it plainly when he wrote that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Most people, when they encounter financial stagnation, respond by raising their goals. A higher income target, a more aggressive savings intention, a firmer commitment to doing better next month. What they rarely do is examine the system, or more precisely, recognize that there is no system, and that the absence of one is what is quietly absorbing every gain. Consider the image of a tire with a slow, invisible leak. You pull into the station, add air, and drive away with confidence. For a while, everything feels fine. The tire holds. And then, gradually, imperceptibly, it begins to soften again. The effort was real. The air was real. The problem is that neither the effort nor the air addressed the actual issue, which was never about the amount of air, but about the structure that was supposed to hold it. More pressure into a compromised vessel does not produce a different result. It produces the same result, slightly delayed. This is what most financial lives look like from the inside. Not reckless, not failing, just leaking, slowly, steadily, in ways that are easy to overlook when income is growing and the lifestyle looks fine from the outside. The hidden cost of this misdiagnosis is not a single bad decision. It is not a dramatic financial event you can point to and learn from. It is something quieter and, ultimately, more expensive: years. Years of genuine effort faithfully applied to the wrong diagnosis. Years during which financial peace was always deferred to the next income level, the one where things would finally be stable enough to get organized, intentional, and structured. And that deferral deserves a moment of honest examination, because the thought itself sounds responsible. I'll get serious about structure once the income stabilizes. It sounds like planning. It sounds like sequencing things sensibly. What it actually is, examined closely, is the financial equivalent of promising to address a structural crack in a building's foundation once the building gets taller. The building getting taller is not the solution. The building getting taller is the increased pressure on the very thing that was never repaired. Structure cannot wait for scale. It has to precede it. That is the realization this section is quietly building toward, not as a directive, but as an observation that, once seen clearly, cannot quite be unseen. The problem was never the volume of income. The problem was always what happened, or more precisely, what didn't happen before the income arrived, which raises the only question worth asking next. If income was not the root, what was? The most expensive problems are rarely the ones that announce themselves. They are not the impulsive purchases, the missed payments, the decisions made in obvious moments of poor judgment. Those problems are visible, they can be identified, corrected, and learned from. The truly costly ones are quieter. They live not in what you did wrong, but in what was never put in place. The invisible absence of a design that should have been there from the beginning. And because an absence leaves no trace, it is almost impossible to hold accountable. You cannot point to the moment it happened. You cannot recall the decision that caused it. It simply was not there. And over time, everything built on top of that gap reflects the instability beneath. This is the real pattern. Not recklessness, not ignorance, not a lack of financial awareness. The root is structural, the absence of a prior architecture that decides, in advance and without emotion, how money moves, where it rests, and what it is assigned to do. Without that architecture, every financial decision gets made in the moment. And in-the-moment decisions, however well-intentioned, are made under the influence of whatever is present, the mood of the week, the social context of the evening, the quiet fatigue of someone who has been working hard and feels reasonably that they have earned a little ease. None of those influences are malicious, but none of them are structural, and their cumulative effect, month after month, is a financial life shaped more by circumstance than by design. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to recognize is that it does not compound through dramatic events. There is no single month where everything falls apart. There is simply a slow, unremarkable accumulation of unstructured decisions, each one individually defensible, collectively corrosive. The subscription that seemed reasonable, the upgrade that felt timely, the savings intention that got deferred because the timing wasn't quite right. None of these are failures of character. They are the natural output of a system, or rather, the absence of one, operating exactly as you would expect it to. Here is where the pattern becomes worth examining with particular honesty. Intelligence does not protect against it. This is the part that surprises people, and perhaps the part most worth sitting with. Financial literacy does not prevent it. A high income does not prevent it. In fact, there is a specific way that both intelligence and income can make the pattern harder to see because they make the rationalizations more convincing. A person of modest means who lacks structure will feel the consequences quickly and clearly. A person of higher income and sharper mind who lacks structure will feel them slowly, partially obscured by a lifestyle that continues to look fine from the outside. The drift is the same. The delay in recognizing it is longer. And a longer delay is not a smaller problem. It is a larger one, quietly accumulating behind a more credible facade. The striking contradiction at the center of this is worth naming directly. The qualities that tend to produce professional success, adaptability, responsiveness, the ability to keep options open and move fluidly through changing circumstances, are precisely the qualities that make financial structure feel unnecessary. A person who is good at navigating complexity in real time, who has built a career on reading situations and responding well, often experiences the idea of a rigid financial framework as a kind of constraint that their intelligence should render unnecessary. I'll know when to save more. I'll recognize when to pull back. I don't need a system because I'm paying attention. It sounds reasonable. It is, in practice, the most sophisticated version of the pattern because it uses genuine competence as justification for the absence of design. And the pattern is a master of disguise. It presents itself as flexibility, as the reasonable refusal to be rigid about money in a life that requires adaptability. It presents itself as enjoyment, as the mature recognition that money is a tool for living, not a number to be hoarded. It presents itself as practicality, as the sensible acknowledgement that structure can come later, once life is more settled. All of these framings are partially true, which is what gives them their staying power. But beneath each of them, if examined honestly, is the same quiet reality. Drift wearing the clothes of choice. Movement without direction, narrated as freedom. Charlie Munger observed that the most common cause of financial failure is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. People who know enough to feel informed, but not enough to recognize what is missing. What is missing, in most cases, is not more knowledge. It is not more income. It is not even more discipline in the traditional sense of the word. It is the prior decision, the designed, deliberate, emotionally neutral arrangement that tells money where to go before the month begins and the pressures accumulate. And perhaps the quietest recognition in all of this is the most important one. This is not about who you are. It is about what was never built. Character did not create the gap. Architecture, or the absence of it, did. That distinction matters more than it might initially seem. There is a version of financial struggle that nobody talks about at dinner. Not because it is shameful exactly, but because it is difficult to articulate. It does not have the clean, dramatic edges of a story worth telling. There is no moment of crisis to point to, no identifiable villain, no obvious turning point. There is simply a life that looks, from the outside, like it is working, and an interior experience that quietly, persistently suggests otherwise. The income is respectable. The apartment is reasonable. The car is appropriate. The vacations happen. And somewhere beneath all of it, running like a low current that never fully switches off, is an anxiety that a better month never quite resolves. This is the cost that rarely appears in financial conversations because it is not a number. It cannot be calculated or charted. It is the cost of peace that was never built, of financial stability that existed on paper but never settled into the body, never became the kind of quiet confidence that allows a person to make decisions from a position of clarity rather than from a position of quiet, ongoing concern. And this cost, invisible as it is, accumulates in ways that eventually touch everything. The way decisions get made, the way opportunities get evaluated, the way risk feels, not as possibility, but as threat. Because when the financial foundation beneath you is uncertain, everything above it carries a weight it was not meant to carry. Stagnation of this kind does not arrive as an event. It arrives as a season, slow, gradual, indistinguishable from ordinary life until enough seasons have passed that you look back and recognize the pattern. It shows up as deferred autonomy, the decision you did not make because the timing never felt quite right, the opportunity you did not pursue because the financial cushion was not thick enough to absorb the risk. It shows up as delayed confidence, not the dramatic loss of it, but the slow erosion that happens when a person has been earning well for years and still cannot answer with any real certainty the basic questions about where they stand and where they are headed. Consider someone who has worked steadily for a decade, who has earned more than their parents did at the same age, who has navigated a career with genuine competence, who by any reasonable external measure has done well. And yet, if you sat with that person in a quiet moment and asked them to trace where the last 10 years of income had gone, not the broad strokes, but the actual flow of it, the direction it moved, and the places it settled, the answer would likely be vague. Not because they were careless, not because they made dramatic mistakes, but because no architecture existed to give the money direction. It arrived. It was absorbed. Life continued. And a decade passed without a structure to show for it. That is not a story about failure. It is a story about drift. And drift, sustained over enough time, produces its own particular form of regret. Not the sharp regret of a specific bad decision, but the duller, heavier regret of years that moved in a direction nobody consciously chose. William James wrote that the greatest use of life is to spend it for something that outlasts it. Most people, when they encounter that idea, think of legacy or meaning. But it applies equally to money, to the question of whether the years of earning were building something that compounds forward, or simply sustaining a present that reset itself every 30 days. The emotional weight of this section is not intended as drama. Drama would suggest that the situation is acute, that something has broken, that urgency is required. What is actually present here is something with more gravity than urgency. The quiet, accumulating weight of proximity without a rival. Years spent close enough to financial freedom to believe it was coming, while the structural condition that would have made it possible was never created. That specific experience of being near something without reaching it, not because of distance, but because of a missing prerequisite, is perhaps the most honest description of where most financially capable people actually find themselves. And here is where something begins to settle into a different kind of clarity. The realization does not arrive with heat or frustration. It arrives the way most important realizations arrive, quietly, with a stillness that suggests it has been true for some time and is only now being acknowledged. The problem was not the income. A higher income would not have resolved this. Another raise would not have built what was missing. What was missing was prior to any of those things, upstream of the money itself, in the design that should have been waiting to receive it. Something must shift, not the number on the income line, something deeper, and in the end, far more within reach. There is a moment in every genuine shift of understanding where the problem does not get smaller. It gets clearer. And clarity, it turns out, is the thing that was missing all along. Not more information, not more income, not more resolve. Simply the ability to see the actual shape of the problem without the distortion of the assumptions that were quietly framing it. That moment is this section. Everything explored up to this point, the exhaustion that persisted through raises, the misdiagnosis that kept prescribing volume, the invisible pattern of drift, the emotional weight of years spent near freedom without reaching it. All of it was circling a single truth that is simple enough to state in one sentence and deep enough to reorganize an entire financial life around. Structure is not what you build after you have enough. Structure is what makes enough possible. Read that again slowly, because it dismantles something most people have been carrying without realizing it. The widely held sequence goes like this. First you earn, then you stabilize, then you organize. First, the resources arrive, then the architecture gets built around them. It feels logical. It feels like responsible sequencing, like furnishing a house before decorating it. But the sequence is inverted. And an inverted sequence, followed faithfully over years, produces the precise experience described in every section of this audiobook. Income that grows without producing peace, effort that compounds without producing freedom, progress that looks real from the outside and feels incomplete from the inside. The reframe is this: structure is not the reward for financial success. It is the condition that makes financial success coherent. It comes first, not because of discipline or deprivation, but because without it, there is no framework for income to fill. And income without a framework does not accumulate, it disperses. Not dramatically, not recklessly, simply in the quiet, gravitational way that all uncontained things disperse. Here is the distinction that clarifies this more precisely than almost anything else. Motivation is what makes you want to save. Structure is what makes saving happen regardless of how you feel on a Tuesday afternoon in a week that has already asked too much of you. This is not a small difference. It is the entire difference between a financial life that depends on constant renewal of willpower and one that operates by design. Motivation is real, but it is variable. It responds to mood, to energy, to circumstance, to how the month has gone. Structure is indifferent to all of those things. It runs whether you are inspired or exhausted, whether the month felt abundant or tight, whether you remembered to be intentional or simply move through the day on autopilot. The metaphor that holds this most clearly is water. A river without banks is not a free river. It is a swamp. The water is present. The volume is there. But without the banks to give it direction and depth, the same water that could have moved with power and purpose simply spreads across the landscape, shallow and stagnant, going nowhere in particular. This is not a failure of the water. Water behaves exactly as physics requires. The question is always about the container, about the structure that either gives the movement direction or allows it to dissipate. Money, in the absence of financial architecture, behaves with the same obedience to its environment. It fills whatever space it finds, and if the space is undesigned, the filling looks a great deal like leaking. What changes when this is understood, genuinely understood, not just intellectually noted, is the nature of every financial decision that follows. Not because new rules have been added, but because the lens has shifted. A person who sees money as something to be managed after it arrives will always be reactive, always slightly behind, always responding to what the month produced. A person who sees money as something that flows into a prior design will make fundamentally different decisions at every point where a choice appears. Not harder decisions, not more disciplined ones. Simply decisions made from a different vantage point, from the position of an architect rather than the position of a passenger. And perhaps the quietest, most important realization in all of this is the one that gently lifts the weight that has been sitting on the listener since the opening of this audiobook. You are not failing at wealth. You are not undisciplined, not careless, not somehow constitutionally unsuited to financial stability. You were building upward, earnestly, consistently, with genuine effort, on a foundation that was never laid. And when the building felt unstable, when the progress felt insufficient, when the anxiety returned despite the growing income, you called it a motivation problem. You reached for more resolve, more drive, more income, because those were the tools you had been given. The problem was never motivation. The problem was sequence, structure before scale, the foundation before the floors, the banks before the water is released. That is the lens. And once it is in place, everything it touches begins to look different. Something changes when a person finally sees the right problem. Not immediately in their bank account, not overnight in their habits, but in something more foundational than either of those things, in the way they relate to the situation itself. The anxiety does not vanish. The circumstances do not rearrange, but the internal experience of those circumstances shifts, quietly and meaningfully, because the framework through which they are being interpreted has changed. And a changed framework, sustained over time, produces a changed life, not through dramatic action, but through the steady accumulation of decisions made from a different understanding. The first thing that shifts is the relationship with income itself. For most people, for most of their earning lives, income has functioned primarily as relief. The paycheck arrives and something loosens, briefly, temporarily, before the month reasserts its pressure and the loosening tightens again. Income, experienced as relief, is income that gets consumed by whatever tension was waiting for it. It fills the anxiety. It addresses the immediate, and then it is gone, having served the emotional function it was recruited to serve without having built anything that compounds forward. But when the architectural lens is in place, when money is understood as material rather than medicine, the relationship changes at the point of arrival. The paycheck is not relief, it is resource. And resource, by its nature, gets directed rather than absorbed. This is where identity begins to quietly recalibrate. The shift from someone who earns and manages to someone who designs and receives is not a dramatic reinvention. It does not require a new personality or an extraordinary act of discipline. It is simply a different self-conception, a subtle but consequential change in the answer to the internal question of what kind of person you are in relation to money. A manager responds to what arrives. A designer prepares for what is coming. A manager makes decisions in the moment, under the full influence of whatever the moment contains. A designer makes decisions in advance, when emotion is neutral and clarity is available. The same income, handled by these two orientations, produces meaningfully different outcomes over time, not because one person tries harder, but because one person has placed the decision upstream of the pressure. And here is the behavioral consequence that follows naturally from that identity shift without needing to be forced or reminded into existence. Money begins to be assigned before it is spent, not because a rule was established and willpower recruited to enforce it, but because a person who sees themselves as an architect does not wait for the building to tell them where the walls should go. The walls are decided before the construction begins. The assignment happens before the paycheck arrives, before the week accumulates its requests, before the mood of a Thursday evening makes a different decision than the clarity of a Sunday morning would have made. One decision, made once, in advance, with full awareness, carries more financial power than months of motivated but unstructured intention. James Clear captured something close to this when he wrote that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. The financial implication of that idea is precise. Every time money is assigned in advance, the person casting that vote is an architect. Every time it is spent reactively, the vote goes to a different identity entirely. Neither vote is loud, but they accumulate. And over enough time, the accumulated votes become the financial life. What dissolves in this section, quietly without ceremony, is the old reliance on discipline as the primary mechanism of financial behavior. Discipline is real, and it has its place, but it is effortful by nature. It requires the continuous renewal of resolve in the face of continuous temptation. It is, in the most honest sense, exhausting as a primary strategy. Structure is something different. Structure is design that runs without requiring a new decision each day. The person who has designed their financial architecture does not need to summon discipline every time a spending decision appears, because the prior design has already made the relevant decisions in the calm and clarity of a moment when emotion was not competing for the outcome. The system carries the weight that discipline was never sustainably suited to carry alone. The confidence that settles in at the end of this shift is worth describing accurately, because it is not the confidence of excitement. It is not the energy of someone who has just discovered a new strategy and is propelled forward by the novelty of it. Those feelings are real but temporary. They are the first chapter of motivation, which fades. What arrives here is steadier than that. It is the quiet confidence of someone who has finally identified the correct problem, and who understands that a problem correctly identified is already, in the most meaningful sense, half resolved. The architecture has not been built yet, but the person who will build it has arrived, and that person sees things differently now, which means they will do things differently, not because they were told to, but because a different perception produces different action as naturally as a different seed produces a different harvest. Understanding changes before behavior does. This is the sequence that most people get wrong when they try to alter their financial lives. They reach for the behavior first, the new budget, the savings target, the rule about dining out, without addressing the understanding that will either sustain or undermine that behavior within weeks. And so, the behavior changes briefly, effortfully, and then reverts. Not because of weakness, but because behavior that is not rooted in a genuinely different understanding is simply discipline in costume. It looks like change. It does not last like change. What this section is about is what happens after the understanding shifts, when the new lens is not just intellectually held, but quietly operational, when it begins to alter, without announcement, the texture of ordinary decisions. Not because a new set of rules has been installed, but because the framework itself has changed. And a changed framework does not produce occasional different decisions. It produces a consistently different relationship with every decision, smaller ones included, perhaps especially smaller ones, because those are the ones that actually compose a financial life. The old pattern had a reliable shape. Income arrived, and then the deciding began. What to do with it? How to allocate it? Whether this month would finally be the month where the intention to save actually held. Every financial decision was made downstream of the money, after it was present, under the full influence of whatever the week had produced emotionally, socially, and practically. This is not a moral failure. It is simply what happens when there is no prior architecture. The money finds the path of least resistance, which is always the path of existing habit and present desire, and the outcome is a financial life shaped by default rather than by design. The shift is precise and, once seen, surprisingly simple. The deciding happens first. The architecture is built before the income arrives to fill it. The assignment is made in the calm of a prior moment, not in the noise of the present one. And income, flowing into a structure that was waiting for it, behaves entirely differently than income flowing into an undesigned space. It does not disperse. It fills deliberately. It moves in the direction it was pointed before the emotion of the month had any opportunity to redirect it. This is not a different amount of money. It is the same money handled by a different sequence. And the difference that sequence produces, compounded over years, is the distance between a financial life that looks fine and one that actually builds. The contrast is worth stating plainly, because plainness serves clarity here better than elegance does. Unstructured income produces lifestyle. Structured income produces architecture, and architecture, sustained over time, produces freedom. These are not equivalent outcomes dressed in different clothing. They are genuinely different destinations, arrived at by the same vehicle, the same income, the same earning capacity, simply operating under different conditions. One condition disperses, the other accumulates. And the condition is always set before the money arrives, not after. There is an illusion that loses its power in this section, and it is worth naming directly because it has held an enormous number of capable people in a holding pattern for an enormous number of years. The illusion is this: I need more before I can structure. It sounds like patience. It sounds like practical sequencing. Like waiting until there is enough to organize before the organizing begins. What it actually is, examined with the clarity now available, is the precise thought pattern that guarantees structure never arrives, because more comes, and the same thought applies to the new more, and then more comes again. And the threshold for enough to structure perpetually recedes, keeping pace with the income. ensuring the architecture is always one level of earnings away from being built. Structure does not require abundance as its prerequisite. It requires decision as its prerequisite. And a decision can be made at any income level, at any stage of financial life, with whatever is currently present. The person who builds structure on a modest income and scales into it will arrive at financial freedom before the person who waits for a larger income to make structure feel worthwhile. This is not inspiration. It is arithmetic. And perhaps the most grounding recognition available in this section is also the simplest one. This has nothing to do with frugality, nothing to do with restriction or smaller living, or the particular austerity that financial advice sometimes carries as an unspoken assumption. Deliberate design is not a smaller life. It is a directed one. The difference between a life shaped by default and a life shaped by prior intention is not the size of the life. It is the authorship of it. The tone that belongs here is not urgency. There is no emergency. There is simply a steady, unhurried clarity available to anyone willing to change the sequence, to place the decision before the dollar, the design before the delivery, the structure before the scale. That clarity does not demand immediate action. It simply makes a different kind of action feel natural when the moment arrives. There is a particular kind of relief that has nothing to do with a problem being solved. It comes earlier than that, at the moment when a problem is finally accurately named. When the fog that surrounded a long-standing struggle lifts just enough to reveal the actual shape of what was there. Not resolution exactly, but something that makes resolution feel genuinely possible for the first time. The weight does not disappear, but it shifts. Because weight that is understood can be addressed, and weight that is misunderstood can only be endured. Return, for a moment, to where this audiobook began. The exhaustion of someone who had done everything right, who had earned, advanced, grown, and still arrived at the end of each month with a quiet, persistent sense that something essential remained unresolved. That person was not failing. That person was experiencing the entirely predictable output of a structural gap, a life built with genuine effort on a foundation that was never designed to hold what was being placed upon it. The exhaustion was real. The effort was real. The diagnosis, however, was wrong, and a wrong diagnosis, faithfully treated, produces the specific frustration of someone who is clearly doing something and somehow not getting well. That misdiagnosis has been examined from every angle now. The belief that income was the answer. The invisible pattern of drift disguised as flexibility. The emotional cost of years spent near financial freedom without the structural condition that would have made it accessible. The insight that reframed the entire problem, not as a volume question, but as a design question. The identity shift from passenger to architect. The practical recognition that the deciding must happen before the dollar arrives, not after. Each of these was a layer removed, not to expose something painful, but to reveal something clarifying. And what they reveal, taken together, dear, is a framework that is coherent enough to orient an entire financial life. The framework, in its simplest form, is this. Wealth is not accumulated by earning more. It is built by designing the architecture that income flows into, fills, and compounds within. This is not a dismissal of income. Income matters, and growing it matters. But income is the water, not the riverbank. It is the material, not the design. And material without design disperses, always. Not sometimes, not in certain circumstances, always, because that is simply the behavior of uncontained things. The architecture is what changes the behavior of the material. The architecture is what transforms volume into direction, and direction into accumulation, and accumulation into the thing that eventually becomes freedom. The elegant truth that holds all of this together is quiet enough to miss if read too quickly. You cannot scale what has not been structured. This is the sentence that, once understood, reorders the sequence permanently. Not as a rule imposed from outside, but as a principle recognized from within, the way a person recognizes a law of physics not because they were told it, but because they have seen it operate too many times to doubt it anymore. Scaling an unstructured financial life does not produce a larger version of success. It produces a larger version of the same instability, with higher stakes and more sophisticated rationalizations. Structure is not the reward waiting at the end of enough earning. It is the condition that makes the earning coherent. And structure, unlike income, is always within reach. This is perhaps the most practically important realization in the entire audiobook, because it removes the last remaining justification for deferral. Income requires circumstance, a willing employer, a growing market, a fortunate opportunity. Structure requires only a decision. It can be built now at whatever income level currently exists, with whatever is currently present. The person who builds structure on a modest income and grows into it will always arrive further ahead than the person who waits for abundance to make structure feel worthwhile. Not because of some motivational principle, but because of the simple mathematics of compounding, which rewards direction and consistency far more generously than it rewards volume alone. What has shifted over the course of this audiobook is not a set of tactics. It is a perception, and perceptions, once genuinely altered, do not revert. This is the quiet, irreversible kind of growth, not the excitement of a new plan which fades, but the settled clarity of someone who has seen a thing accurately and cannot unsee it. The problem has been correctly identified. The lens has been replaced, and from this point forward, the questions that guide financial decisions are different questions entirely. Not, how do I earn more, but what am I building? And is the foundation ready to hold it? That question, asked sincerely and regularly, is itself a form of architecture. It orients the thinking before the money arrives. It keeps the design visible when the noise of daily life would otherwise obscure it. It is the question of an architect, not a passenger, and it belongs now to anyone who has followed this journey from its beginning to here. The direction is clear. The foundation is understood. What comes next is simply the patient, deliberate work of building something that lasts. Somewhere along the way, money became a source of noise, not the loud, dramatic noise of crisis, but the low, continuous noise of uncertainty, the kind that runs beneath ordinary days without announcing itself, that colors decisions with a faint but persistent unease that makes even comfortable months feel provisional. Most people who carry this noise have learned to work around it. They become skilled at keeping busy enough that the noise recedes into the background. But it does not disappear. It waits in the quiet moments, in the pause before checking a balance, in the hesitation before a purchase, in the vague, sourceless tension that arrives at the end of a month that was, by all reasonable measures, fine. What is worth understanding now, after everything explored in this audiobook, is that this noise was never really about money. It was about the absence of a system that could be trusted to hold what was earned. Anxiety, in its most functional form, is the mind's response to uncertainty, to the experience of moving through a landscape without reliable ground beneath the feet. When financial life is unstructured, every month is an improvisation. Every paycheck is a fresh negotiation between competing demands, moods, and intentions. And the mind, which prefers predictability to surprise even when the surprise is pleasant, registers this improvisation as a low-grade threat. Not danger, just instability. Just the quiet, continuous sense that the ground might shift. Structure changes this at the level of the nervous system, not just the spreadsheet. When money has been assigned a direction before the month begins, when the system exists and has been trusted through enough cycles to feel reliable, something in the emotional relationship with income quietly relaxes. The paycheck arrives and there is nothing to negotiate, because the negotiation happened earlier, in a calmer moment, with full awareness. The month proceeds and there is less reactivity, because the decisions that matter most have already been made. The end of the month arrives without the familiar audit of where it all went, because the architecture made the destination legible before the journey began. This is not a small change in financial experience. It is a fundamental change in how daily life feels from the inside. Patience, in this context, becomes something different from what the word usually implies. Patience is most often described as a discipline, as the effortful suppression of urgency, the practiced resistance to wanting things sooner than they can arrive. But patience rooted in a trusted system is not effortful at all. It is the natural behavior of someone who knows that the conditions for growth have been met, and that time is now an ally rather than a pressure. A gardener who has prepared the soil, planted with intention, and watered consistently does not pace anxiously between the rows. The waiting is not a test of character. It is simply the appropriate response to a process that is already underway. Financial patience, built on structural trust rather than willpower, has exactly this quality: unhurried, grounded, untroubled by the pace of a process that is operating as it should. There is a meditative quality to the financial lives that have genuinely arrived at peace, and it is worth observing carefully because it contradicts the image that financial culture tends to project. The most peaceful financial lives are rarely the largest. They are not defined by the size of the portfolio or the scale of the income. They are defined by arrangement, by the quiet, deliberate order of a life in which every dollar has a direction and every month proceeds according to a prior design. The peace is not purchased by abundance. It is produced by clarity. And clarity, as this entire audiobook has argued, is a function of structure, not of scale. Maturity in financial life is perhaps best measured not by net worth, but by the distance between income and anxiety. A person who earns modestly within a trusted structure carries less financial anxiety than a person who earns generously within none. This is not romantic. It is observable. The structure creates the distance, the buffer between what arrives and the emotional turbulence that, in its absence, greets every arrival. And building that distance does not require a larger income. It requires the prior decision to design before the money comes, to assign before the month begins, to trust the system enough to let it run. There is a steadiness available at this stage of the journey that is different in quality from anything that came before it. Not the steadiness of having arrived at a destination, but the steadiness of someone who has found solid ground and knows, with quiet confidence, what they are standing on. The excitement of a new insight has settled into something more durable, the assurance of a changed perspective that will continue to orient decisions long after this audiobook has ended. The noise has not been eliminated by force. It has been replaced, gradually, structurally, by something that the noise could never coexist with: clarity, and the peace that follows it without being chased. Every long journey deserves a moment of stillness at its end, not to celebrate exactly, and not to summarize, but to stand quietly with what has been understood and let it settle into its proper place. Because the most important realizations are not the ones that arrive with fanfare. They are the ones that arrive with the particular calm of something that has always been true, finally recognized. And what has been uncovered across these sections is precisely that kind of truth. Not invented here, not discovered for the first time, but seen clearly, perhaps, for the first time by the person who needed most to see it. So let it be stated simply, without decoration, in the plainest language available. Income is what you earn. Wealth is what your system does with it. These are not two versions of the same thing. They are two different categories entirely, one describing a flow, the other describing what happens to that flow in the presence or absence of design. A river and a flood both contain water. The difference between them is architecture. And this distinction, held clearly, dissolves the central confusion that brought most people to this audiobook in the first place. The confusion of treating a design problem as a resource problem, of reaching perpetually for more when the actual need was always for better arrangement of what was already arriving. The principle extends, as all genuine principles do, far beyond the domain where it was first recognized. In every field where lasting achievement exists, where outcomes compound over time rather than reset with each effort, structure precedes scale. The architect does not begin lifting before the drawings are complete. The composer does not summon the orchestra before the score has been written. The farmer does not scatter seed across unprepared ground and hope that abundance will compensate for the absence of readiness. In each of these, the sequence is the same: design first, then execution. Preparation first, then growth. Structure first, then scale. This is not a financial principle borrowed from other disciplines. It is a universal principle that finance, like every other domain of meaningful achievement, cannot escape. And yet most people spend their most productive financial years attempting to escape it, not out of stubbornness, but out of a genuine misunderstanding about what the game actually requires. They were handed the wrong sequence and followed it faithfully. They were told that the resources came first and the structure followed, when the truth has always been precisely the reverse. Which brings everything to the realization that has been quietly assembling itself since the very first section, the one that may land now with a gentleness that earlier it could not have carried, because the understanding required to receive it has been built carefully over the full length of this journey. You were never behind. Not in the way the anxiety suggested, not in the way the comparison to others implied, not in the way the gap between your earnings and your peace seemed to confirm. You were not behind because of a deficit of effort, or intelligence, or discipline, or deserving. You were building, genuinely, earnestly building, in the wrong order. The floors were going up before the foundation was laid. The scale was being pursued before the structure existed to receive it. And the instability that resulted was not evidence of inadequacy. It was simply the physical consequence of an inverted sequence, operating exactly as physics requires. That is not a small reframe. For some people, It is the reframe that changes everything, because it returns agency without requiring shame. It says, the problem was correctable all along, and it is correctable this, and the years behind you are not wasted, because the understanding you carry forward from them is precisely what will make the years ahead different. There is a version of freedom that most people imagine requires a much larger number than they currently have, a threshold of abundance beyond which the anxiety finally lifts, the decisions finally ease, and life finally feels like it is operating from a position of genuine security. What this audiobook has tried to demonstrate, quietly and without insistence, is that this threshold is not numerical. It is structural. The freedom is not waiting on the other side of a larger income. It is waiting on the other side of a prior design, of the decision, made once and maintained with patience, to build the architecture before attempting the scale. You do not need more. You need a place for more to go. And the profound, stabilizing truth embedded in that single sentence is this: a place for more to go is something you can build right now, with exactly what you have, in exactly the life you are currently living, not after the next raise, not once the circumstances settle, now, here, with this. The foundation does not require abundance to be laid. It only requires the decision to begin. Thank you for staying with this, not just for the time it took to listen, but for the particular quality of attention this kind of audiobook requires. It is not easy to sit with the possibility that the approach you have trusted, the one you followed faithfully and with genuine effort, may have been solving the wrong problem. That kind of honesty asks something real vile of a person. It asks for the willingness to hold a long-held assumption loosely enough to examine it. And that willingness, quiet as it is where every meaningful change begins. If only one thing travels with you beyond this final section, let it be this: structure is not a constraint on your financial life. It is the condition under which your financial life becomes possible. Not a cage built around abundance, but the architecture that makes abundance coherent, that gives income a direction, gives effort a destination, and gives time the design it needs to work on your behalf rather than simply passing through. The rest will follow. It does not need to be forced or rushed or pursued with urgency. Go quietly. Build deliberately. The scale will come when the foundation is ready to receive it, and it will be ready sooner than you think.